Well, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to some stories. We hope you come away encouraged today from these stories. It's a story of a partnership between two like-minded organizations. It's the story of a incredible business that we both participated in and are still participating in, helping them go to scale to generate significant impact in Uganda. So we're going to share that story. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure you know who I am and who Matthew is. So my name is John Halverson. I'm a partner in the Talented Impact Fund. My background is I got a degree in theology from Wheaton, then I got an MBA and joined Cargill. 15 years at one of the world's largest food and ag multinationals, all over the world, international business, great training for what I'm doing today. When I was living in England with Cargill, God called me away from that business to invest in other businesses in East Africa. I was offered an opportunity to lead the investment strategy for a foundation that was investing in mid-sized businesses in Tanzania. We lived in Africa, my wife and 4 children, for 4 years. Experience of a lifetime. Saw 50 businesses that we invested in. Some did great, some struggled, but the ones that did great had significant impact. Came back from that and was vice president of Land O'Lakes for 5 years, leading their international work in particularly Africa. And 3 years ago, did what I'm the most passionate about, launched an impact investment fund to do direct investing in mid-sized businesses in Africa with three other like-minded partners. So with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to this recording. And I just want to really express my gratitude for your time. My name is Matthew Roars. I serve as the CEO at Synapse. And similar to John, my background began in the marketplace. So for over 10 years, I worked in the investment management and private equity business. And it's a longer story than we have time for now, but God called me to the intersection point of marketplace solutions to poverty and a real love for practical disciple making. So our family moved to Nairobi, Kenya in 2016, similar to John. Incredible opportunity to really understand the model of Synapse and the promise of businesses led by entrepreneurs who desire to grow, desire to scale, but want to do that for God's kingdom. So we've given you a little bit of background about us, but we want to make sure you understand, if you're new to either organization, who we are and what we do. So Synapse is the Latin word for the mustard seed. So when you think of that familiar parable where Jesus said that small seed becomes the largest plant in the garden, he says something really interesting, that the birds come and find rest in the branches. And we think one way that you can understand that parable is when you look at an entrepreneur who has a small seed of an idea and the audacity to take that idea to the market and grow it over time, when that business can become profitable and it sustains jobs, that picture of employees and dependents and others in the community coming in and finding rest under that kingdom business, we believe that's an incredible picture of that parable that Jesus shared. So as an organization, we exist to serve entrepreneurs like this. As they grow businesses, many of them are dedicating those to the Lord. We don't only work with committed Christians, but as they do that, and they're entrepreneurs by choice, not by necessity. So they're doing this because they have a desire in them to grow a business. They create and sustain jobs. They can make disciples as they're going in their work, and they can bless the community. We do that through a variety of means. We train entrepreneurs. We accelerate the highest potential entrepreneurs. And then really importantly, we create long-term community in every environment where we work, because the business journey, the social engagement, the spiritual journey of every entrepreneur is a lifelong one. And so we want to help people connect in peer-to-peer relationships, solve problems, do business together, and have a multi-generational impact on their community and on their nation.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks. I'm deeply thankful for Synapse. It's for a fund like Talanton, the quality of our investment pipeline makes all the difference in the world. So Synapse is the best at generating high quality deal flow, investment opportunities for Talanton. The first time I saw Synapse in depth was when they invited me to be a judge at a pitch event. It's a business plan competition, a lot like a Christian Shark Tank. It's a lot of fun. And I saw 6, 7 just really good businesses that were well trained and had a wonderful pitch, and that's what we look for at Talanton. We look for partners with shared values. We look for companies with shared values. So we invest in growth stage businesses between 500,000 and 5 million in sales. We feel like those are the ones that can have societal impact when they go to scale. We also look for businesses that create jobs for people who really need them and access to markets for thousands of people in the system around the business, including the suppliers. We share a deep desire to bring hope far beyond just financial benefits in terms of spiritual integration and spiritual formation with the leaders we work with and across the value chains that we work. So the ultimate goal is to transform lives holistically, spiritually, the social side of people, and also spiritually. So with that, I want to turn it over to Matthew to talk about the daunting challenge and problems that we're facing, and then I'll speak about the opportunity. Matthew?
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
This picture may be familiar to many of you, but this is part of the skyline of the city of Nairobi. And in the foreground, you see a bit of Kibera slum, which is the largest slum in Africa. And in the background, you see high-rise buildings and obvious signs of growth. And we think this is a picture to frame some of the most pressing problems that I'm going to talk about, and then some of the opportunities that John's going to highlight in a moment. So as I talk about these problems, I think these are going to be familiar issues to each of you, but we want to drive on how we think there may be new solutions to some of these most pressing issues. So first of all, poverty. For the last 50 to 60 years, over $1 trillion in aid has been poured into sub-Saharan Africa. And yet we still see stubbornly high rates of extreme poverty. Before COVID, economists were estimating that over 650 million people around the world were living at or below the $1.90 per day threshold for extreme poverty. Sadly, with what's happened with COVID, the projections are that an additional 140 million people are falling back below that line. This is setting us back 7 years in the fight against extreme poverty. And disproportionately, as we look at where this is headed in the future, sub-Saharan Africa is affected by this challenge. Secondly, youth unemployment. And this is an interesting dynamic because it has the potential to be very positive, but also very negative, depending on which way these economies grow. Again, pre-COVID, the World Bank was estimating that from 2020 to 2030, 600 million new jobs needed to be created just to keep pace with population growth. So as we step back and think about that, this is typically people ages 15 to 24. And many times they're completing education, and there's the idea of this social contract. If I work hard, I'm going to be able to provide for my family. If economies can deliver on this, they will lead incredible development in their nations. But if that social contract, if that idea is broken, it brings despair, could bring riots, and ultimately revolutions in these nations. And then lastly, corruption. Just to give an example, this is not unique to Kenya, but in Kenya, 85% of the population self-identifies as Christian. Yet Transparency International ranks Kenya as 124th in the world in its Corruption Perceptions Index. I'm sharing a lot of statistics, and you may feel like, this is a lot that I'm having to try to digest here, but here's why that corruption matters so much. It does unbelievable harm to the economy. Disproportionately, the poor bear a greater responsibility as they have to participate in bribery to navigate their life. And as we think about what this means for the church, it can do incredible harm to the integrity of our message. So when we look at places like Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, we think there has to be a different way to get at the roots of some of these stubborn challenges.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks. I mean, there is huge challenges, and the problem of poverty is very real, but I want to give you some hope. When you look at this picture and really focus on it, really contemplate on what's it going to take for the people living at the bottom of the half of this picture to really get out of that situation that's debilitating, that often leads to things like human trafficking, forced servitude. A lot of the outcomes of poverty can be dealt with the best possible way by giving someone a good job, giving them incentive to move beyond their current situation and provide for their families. and for themselves. So of that 600 million new jobs that Matthew spoke about, most of them will be created. Most experts say 80% will be created by small to medium-sized businesses. It's like that in almost every economy, including East Africa. And what's exciting is that these economies are growing. So Bloomberg Research recently had a really interesting analysis on the most resilient economies in the world during the pandemic. 7 of the 10 were in Africa, and 3 of the 10 are destination markets for Talanton and where Synapse also works. And that's Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. So Rwanda grew 10% GDP in 2019. And as soon as the pandemic slows down, that's expected to go back to 8 to 10% GDP growth over the next 3-4 years. These are growth rates that the developed world only dream about. So they're exciting places. There's a huge entrepreneurial class that's often underemployed and underfinanced. And this is what's exciting. When you sit down with a middle class East African, they'll often have not just one, but maybe 3 or 4 business cards. They'll say, hey, I got tired of my cousin asking me for money, so instead I helped him start a pharmacy. They'll say, my wife has launched a juice business, and here's my 2 businesses. So Synapse is really good at helping those entrepreneurs, finding those entrepreneurs, and helping them get the training they need to really take those visions in those small businesses and medium-sized businesses to scale. Talanton comes in with real investment capital and prepares those businesses in due diligence to manage that capital wisely and to deploy it in a responsible way that can be transformational not only for that business, but for society. So these are exciting markets. The problems are real, but the opportunities are also incredibly real and exciting. And that's what we're welcoming you to be a part of if you're not already a part of these stories. So with that, I want to focus on a single company just to bring this down to kind of a true story of partnership, but also a tangible company that demonstrates what we're talking about. So Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, John. So in 2018, Pamela Okecho connected with Synapse through our first ever Synapse Entrepreneur Academy. So you can see in the photo, Pamela's there on the left-hand side. Pamela's a member of the senior management team of Rabboni Limited, and she's here with a number of their staff at their facility outside Kampala. Rabboni is an agro-processing company that buys maize from over 2,000 smallholder farmers throughout Uganda. They process that into flour, and then they resell that in the marketplace. And we've been talking about different names of organizations here, and Rabboni has its own story. The company's name is the Aramaic word that Mary used when she first sees Jesus after the resurrection, when she calls him master. And the founders of the company decided to name this Rabboni because they wanted to make very clear, God, we are dedicating the company to you. We see you as Lord over everything that we're doing. So when we first launched in Uganda in 2018, Pamela came to us because she had a dream and she had a problem. And the dream was that Rabboni would continue to grow and that they would have much greater impact throughout the region and throughout the nation. But she recognized in order to do that, she had some gaps in skills that she wanted to fill. So the Synapse Entrepreneur Academy is a 16-week mini MBA program. So it takes MBA level content, but makes it hyper practical. So there's no exams, there are no papers, and all of the business and spiritual examples in the cases and in the material are contextualized for each market. So she worked through that. She was getting MBA level customer development, MBA level finance, operations, and human resources and HR. And then we also make an invitation to these participants. We don't only work with Christians, but we're very open about who we are. If you'd like to consider what it means to lead a business for God, to have a kingdom business framework that leads to a practical spiritual integration plan in your business, we'll give you some ideas about how to do that. After completing that 4-month program, Pamela continued with us, and she participated in our business plan competition. John mentioned a different competition where he was a judge. She learned how to pitch Rabboni, had some invaluable training that would later help in their engagement with Talanton. And then she later applied successfully for our 6-month fast track accelerator program. So this is for the top 10 businesses that emerge each year. Each business is assessed They get formed into a cohort, and then consultants and advisors help that leader to develop a roadmap to scale. So in talking with Pamela, I mean, she had great appreciation for the technical training. That was 10 months of engagement over the course of those 3 different programs with Synapse. But I wanted to share what she felt like was one of her biggest takeaways. And you compare this to the backdrop of the name of the organization and just pressing further into what's it mean to be a kingdom business leader. And what she said was that the concept of stewardship, that if God really was the owner of it all, and they were called to be stewards, then what that meant is they could trust him, especially as they were engaging with employees and these 2,000 farmers that they served. And she said, we can be generous, we can trust God as we engage with them, knowing that he has a heart for them. This is what he would want us to do. So while we were serving her across almost a full year of different engagement, we were also in conversation with Talanton. And as John has mentioned, there's a clear synergy in the relationship as we are training and accelerating high potential entrepreneurs. Many of them come to a point where one of their next problems is access to capital. So John's going to tell you about that now.
Yeah, so I really first heard about Rabboni from Toby, one of Matthew's colleagues. And when we started to get to know Rabboni, focusing heavily on the CEO, Daniel, I realized this is a management team, a CEO and management team that has all the values that we look for in a good investment for Talanton. They had integrity, they were ambitious, they were visionary, they had hearts for the farmers, and they really had a strong desire to see the farmers benefit from the overall investment and to improve their agronomy, their access to finance, and the lives for their families. So we embarked on what we do, and that's an initial screen. It's the first step of our due diligence process. It helps us understand fit with our fund and whether or not we want to put them through what we consider very rigorous due diligence. And during the deep due diligence is where real ministry starts to happen. It's where you build trust. It's where you build deep relationships that are going to benefit you for the life of the investment. And we find things. There's gaps. Almost every mid-sized business has gaps of some kind, and Rabboni was no exception. And we have honest conversations about how to fill those gaps. In the Rabboni's case, we actually brought in a couple of external local advisors to help set things up. We want to get them investment ready. It's actually quite dangerous for a business to get real investment capital when they don't have the systems, the talent, or the dashboard in place to manage it. So Synapse does a great job getting them to where they engage in due diligence with Talanton, where we build a robust financial model. We actually help them develop a sound business plan that includes all of the things that Matthew's talking about. What is your vision beyond just financial, but also social and spiritual for when this business grows 7 to 10x? We love that they have a deep heart for the farmers. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, these are the facts. I mean, this business is growing and growing fast. And they were quite good already at accessing working capital. So when Talanton structured the investment together with the management team, Daniel and Pam and Henry, we decided to do it in 2 tranches. The first tranche was 570,000, of which 150,000 is working capital. And that's to take their warehousing capacity from 1,000 metric tons to 4,000 metric tons. So 4x in the first round. When that goes well and everything's on the right track, we're going to follow that up with a $930,000 investment that's already approved by our investment committee. We'll take their capacity to 7,000 metric tons. So 7x where they currently are. What this means in terms of impact is super exciting. Well over 5,000 smallholder farmers at that point, well over $4 million in sales. This will be a business that is a serious business for the country of Uganda in terms of food supply, in terms of food security, but also in terms of farmer livelihoods. So with that, Matthew, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about magnitude.
Yeah, so we look at stories like that and we just praise God, the story of growth, what that's meant with revenue and growing sophistication, impact on employees, impact on smallholder farmers. The reality is that there are thousands and thousands of aspiring Rabbonis across East Africa. but there's a challenge. As you look at this slide, the majority of those that we see and that we've worked with over time are in the earlier stages of their journey. And as John was talking about, even in Rabboni's story, they have significant gaps in typically their experience and in their business model. And when we talk to most of them, they typically frame this as, well, if I only had that loan, or if I had that equity partner, it's just a capital problem, then everything would be off to the races and every graph would be up and to the right. And we respectfully, carefully, typically disagree with that and say, well, there may be some things in your capacity, in your learning that we want to dig into. So this is what Synapse exists to do, from the startup stage all the way through growth stage, through a variety of different engagements, like I mentioned earlier, training programs, acceleration, ongoing alumni community, spiritual support. All of this is meant to help entrepreneurs like this build the skills that they need in order to pursue the trajectory of the potential impact of their company and of their idea. Now, part of the challenge is because of the demographics that we're serving. And again, these are entrepreneurs by choice, not by necessity. They're leading small and medium enterprises, but still sensitivity to cost is a very real dynamic. So we charge for everything that we do, but because the entrepreneurs we serve generally cannot pay for-profit rates for those services, you see at the bottom, philanthropic investment essentially scholarships their fee. It meets that delta that they can't pay so that they can move along this progression, refine their ideas, gain a greater vision for the kingdom, and walk in community with others that are like them. Well, what's exciting and what we see in the example with someone like Rabboni is they can come to a place where the legitimate next need really is impact investment. So John's going to talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, so on both ends of the spectrum on this graphic, there's magnitude. And Synapse literally has trained thousands of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs, established entrepreneurs. Whereas when Talanton comes in and finds the best of those businesses that are really ready for significant scaling and significant impact across society, we look and say, where and how can we work with those leaders to take them to the next level? And the outcome of that, again, is magnitude to the thousands. So right now we have 7 businesses in our portfolio in 4 countries. It's a nice balanced portfolio, supporting about 10,000 suppliers and their families, which is more like 40 or 50,000 people. And when those farmers go from $3 or $4 a day to seven to $10 a day, it's truly transformational for them. Their kids are no longer working in the fields. They have happier family lives. They're no longer often beating their wives, doing destructive things like that, because they have economic incentive. They can have better lives. They can get access to electricity. So that's the outcome of an impact investment, for going from early stage startup all the way through to significant scaling. So an impact investment seeks to generate a transformation as a result of the investment. So Talanton seeks an 8% return net of all fees and costs. So this is not fully risk adjusted, but we also look at each individual business we analyze and say, how can they achieve a 15% IRR as a base case to generate the kind of impact that is going to be sustainable and scalable over time. So Matthew, I think going through that growth stage is so critical to go back up to that significant impact in the long run for the businesses that you help prepare for someone like Talanton to make the investment.
Yeah, and one more takeaway we have from this slide, if we step back and think about the problem and the opportunity, and why are all of us on this call? What could this become? We believe that this kind of a partnership is indicative of what we need to see in much greater collaboration throughout the global church. We look at supporting people from those earliest stages when they genuinely want to grow companies that can become profitable, that can create and sustain jobs, that can be an economic engine for what's happening inside that market, fueling the local church's growth. But that there needs to be coordination and a vision for what happens with that over time as these companies can grow. What role does capital play? What role can capacity builders play? And other advisors and leaders in these broader ecosystems. So we've talked quite a bit about impact at kind of more of a theoretical level, and we want to just take a few minutes to show that each organization is really focused on making that practical. So when we talk about impact, that's not a vague notion, but it takes on very specific metrics. We're serious about monitoring and evaluation. We're always learning, always improving how we do that. But one really important thing to highlight, which I hope has come out loud and clear, is we believe we're called to be a servant to these remarkable men and women that God has called to launch and scale these kinds of businesses. And so when we step back and we look at, well, what do these kinds of people do? Here's a few things that we see in our data. Number one, they're job creators. So with both Sinapis and Talanton, they're creating jobs. Or we think about even in this year of COVID, sometimes more importantly, they can sustain jobs through their skill and ability to keep the doors open in a company. And John, I think it'd be great if you want to speak again to some of the supplier effect and smallholder farmers and what that looks like. It's true, and again, across each end of this in the partnership, but do you want to take a few minutes and speak to that?
Yeah, you know, Matthew, I think it's always great to tell actual stories of impact. The numbers that you see on the page are real. Both of our organizations are really committed to trying to do rigorous impact measurements and making sure that we report those back routinely to our investors, to the people who are our funders, our participants in what we do. That's really critical. But you know, every single number represents a human life, and those human lives are amazing when it becomes out in the story. So I'm just going to share one quick story, Matthew. One of our investments in a business in Rwanda is in a business, a creamery, where over 50% of the staff are deaf, and the women in that business share stories of being ostracized by society, literally abused and thrown on the street. It's in poor families when someone has a disability, that's often the outcome, tragically. But when they get a job, it really completely changes their life. And one story a woman shared with me was when Masaka hired her. And they hired her initially to sweep the floors. They thought it was going to be like a sacrifice, a social impact part of the business. What they found out is that these women had incredible gifts and abilities and talents, and they were highly engaged employees. And the smiles on their faces tell it all. These are transformed lives. And that's what we both seek to measure across the board, is those kinds of stories of people who gain dignity, meaning, and purpose through work. Their God created us all to work. And in the context of a scaling business that no longer needs to be financially dependent on outsiders, but can do it because of positive cash flow, that truly honors God and honors everyone involved. And that's the goal of Talanton in partnership with Synapse, is to see those businesses flourish to the benefit of those countries in the kingdom.
Yeah, that's right. That's awesome. We also see that these remarkable leaders who, again, are shouldering this day to day, week in and week out, they're growing their companies. They have the skill, they have the calling, they have the tenacity to continue to pursue new opportunities, to pivot when they need to, and grow. One statistic from our alumni base, average growth rate the first year after they complete a program is 81%. They're growing at 37% compound annual growth rate. Pre-COVID, that was just south of 50%. So these are people with the skill to grow companies. They can raise capital. But I think, again, for both Sinapis and Talanton, if we had to say, ultimately, what do we want to see the most? It's, does that integration of God's kingdom really get practical? And a couple more statistics. 82% of those that we serve have an active spiritual or social impact program. 38% are reporting that someone has come to faith in Christ through their business. And so as we look at these amazing people that we serve, and just, again, the complementary goals that we have in the partnership, we're so thankful for how God is using them across these different dimensions of impact. So this is not an exhaustive list, but as we get ready to transition to Q&A, we wanted to share 3 practical ways that if God is stirring in your heart, or you may already, and again, thank you if you've already been partnering with us, but here are some ways that you can get involved if you'd like to. And the first is, we'd love to talk more. So we're going to do that through the Q&A function, but if you'd like to talk to both organizations, John and David and Toby and I are happy to get on a call. It could be with one organization, and each of us have discussed this, and we're happy to see however that would play out. Another way would be lending your expertise. So for Synapse, we have growing opportunities for stakeholders who have real experience. So if you're accustomed to feeling like the only way I can engage is through my checkbook, there's actually a great opportunity as these networks grow to take the skills that you've built and partner with the global church, with brothers and sisters around the world, to help them grow their businesses. And John, I'll stop there and let you, pick up on those opportunities.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks. We'd love to have a conversation with you, maybe even together, if that's of interest to you. We assume some people may say, hey, I want to participate across the value chain. I want to get involved with Synapse. And I love seeing the follow-on investment in the best of the Synapse graduates to really help those businesses go to scale. So let's talk. And we, like Synapse, we love conversations with folks who say, hey, I have a wealth of experience. I've been through the school of hard knocks. I have gifts and abilities. I love mentoring, or I love even a discipleship relationship or a spiritual mentoring coaching relationship. We need that kind of talent and expertise to join us to really help us deliver on the vision. So Talanton has always aspired from the very beginning to be just a high quality investment fund where we do detailed financial reporting quarterly. So all of our investors get an update quarterly on how they're doing financially with their own investment in the fund. We also do a quarterly investor briefing on impact and tell stories of the companies we're investing in, talk about our pipeline, talk about the fund, and it's really the investors that deserve the credit. It's their capital that allows us to do what we do. Now, Talanton is set up to be able to manage money from donor advised foundation accounts. I would say most of our investors are deploying capital from those types of foundations, family foundations, self-directed IRAs. We even have a handful of investors who have said, hey, listen, I love your disciplines. I love what you're doing. I want to diversify my portfolio. I want to put some of my investment capital on the conventional side of investing into something that aligns with my faith or my values, specifically for kingdom impact. And they look at Talanton as a great option to do something unique with their investment portfolio. So we'd love to explore that in a lot further detail. We have a full private placement memorandum. But more importantly than that, let's talk. Let's have an initial meeting to explore your questions, to see what's on your heart, and to see where and how you might be a fit with Talanton. And Matthew, over to you for how to participate with Synapse.
Yeah, in terms of the potential investment with Synapse, your philanthropic resources can allow entrepreneurs to, again, access the capacity building that they need, ongoing community coaching, advisory, and it facilitates this type of connection so that as we are investing in their knowledge, investing in the maturity of their faith and of their businesses, they are building profitable companies that are inherently scalable. So there's an injection of support that allows that capacity building to happen. And from that point on, these are entrepreneurs leading companies, many of which are dedicated to Christ, figuring out, how do I grow? How do I create and sustain jobs? How do I have an influence on the community? How do I support the growth of the local church from the inside out? So as we get ready to transition to Q&A, I just want to leave you with one last thing. We believe that this is a different way to think about missions. It's a different way to think about the Great Commission. It's a different way to think about poverty alleviation. It's a different way to think about investing for the kingdom. All of these things can come together to equip and invest profitable companies dedicated to Christ. And we see this as a great kingdom calling. In order to see a God-sized dent in the problem and to grab on to the opportunities that we think are unbelievable in East Africa and in many other places around the world, we need help. We need partners. And so if God is stirring in your heart, we'll go back to where we started on this slide. We'd love to continue that conversation, pray together. But with that, we'll transition to Q&A.
Very good. Thanks, John and Matthew. This is Toby Kilgore with Synapse, and together with David, we'll field the questions to you guys. So the first broad question. It's a great question. And it comes in acknowledging the importance of job creation for economic development. But then the question continues, but if corruption remains rife, then even our well-equipped entrepreneurs will be swimming against the tide and cannot themselves change or improve the macro environment. What can be done?
Matthew, do you mind if I chime in first on this one?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so when I lived and worked in Tanzania, I was with a secular organization, and they were doing some incredible work, quite honestly. But the one thing that was lacking was the most important thing in my view, and that was a moral compass. The great thing about faith-driven approaches to investing is that you can do things noticeably different where there's endemic corruption. And you can even treat your investees or the people you work with different than, say, a secular bank might do that. Let me just share a really quick story. So when the pandemic hit, one of our investments in Nairobi is a system of schools in Nairobi, and they went to zero revenue. Literally, the government shut down all education, including private. So we thought, what do we do? So we reached out to our investor community, and their generosity was immediately apparent. We raised over 50,000 in just a few days. And we were able to make that available to the entrepreneur, in this case, a Kenyan woman, to help her keep her best talent, to help her be able to pay her leases and landlords, to keep her business viable. We also injected a little bit of equity, and now roll the clock ahead to today, and her school is highly sought after. When that society opens up, she will be one of the schools that survives and thrives. And that's what a faith-driven investor does. It doesn't pull the rug out from underneath investees when they're struggling. It figures out how to work with them, how to turn the corner, and how to help them get to a place where they can take off again when the trouble is behind you. So I do think there's a way of doing things very different when there's corruption, and it starts with the human heart and bringing a biblical worldview into the equation in all aspects of life, including business, and letting that be the guide for all decisions and all relational, connections.
Yeah, to build on that, I totally agree. So when I lived in Nairobi, I was often working with entrepreneurs, specifically in the Entrepreneur Academy. And that's where out of our 6 hours in class together, it's roughly an hour each week that's dedicated to kingdom business. And I remember vividly so many times when we would get into the sections on corruption. And it was really the power of God's word, where people who were saying, I genuinely want to do the right thing, but I think the lie was based on this deep fear that if I don't participate in this system of bribery and corruption, I won't be able to provide for my family. I won't be able to be successful. And so it's deep in the heart of these leaders, and it was fun to watch it happen in community, where someone would say, this is not of God. We can be successful if we walk according to his principles. And sometimes literally in the classroom, they would stand up and there would be kind of this rousing charge. So it was one of the data points that we look at. It was not on that data slide, but when we do our annual impact survey, we ask our alumni, are you currently participating at all in bribery? And then what, as a result of what you've learned, which again points to the power of the word, have you decided to do? And very, very consistently, we've been right at 72, 73% of those that graduate from these programs say, as a result of what I've learned, as a result of deeply believing I don't have to buy the lie, I am no longer going to participate in that system. And that does not count those that had always had that stance. So this was 72% of those who said, yeah, sometimes I do. And so I can't honestly answer the full societal picture of how does that change, but I do believe as the Holy Spirit's moving in the heart of leaders who have influence, they're going to be able to show a different way and speak a different word.
Matthew and John, several folks have asked questions about the relationship between our two organizations. Can you say a little bit more each about how we work together? Some people are thinking, does Talanton fund scholarships at Synapse, or how does this actually work in the real world on the ground there in East Africa?
Yeah, I'll say it starts with deeply held shared values. Any great partnership at its very core has to be values driven, and those are truly seamless with Synapse. We both have a heart for kingdom impact through training and making disciples and better leaders in business, and also affirm the calling as a noble calling to be in business. For sure, we don't have any sort of fee structure. It's more of a trust-based relationship based on referrals. And Synapse has helped us out in other investments with due diligence. We had a formal engagement with them. They have talent on the ground with unique insights and capabilities. We've been at their pitch event, like we mentioned. And I think going forward, Talanton aspires to be a $50 million fund within 2-3 years, and we need investment pipeline to achieve that. And that hasn't been a major issue for us. We're getting a lot of opportunities, but when you get an opportunity that has the mindset of a Synapse graduate, it's literally 10x better. To have that starting point of an entrepreneur that already has this vision of kingdom impact through business.
Yeah, again, echo that, agree with that. A story that came to mind that as we were thinking about this opportunity today, I hadn't remembered, but it really is relational. So first core value of Synapse is that we are a relational group, and we believe ultimately to see lasting, multi-generational economic, social, and spiritual impact, relationships are essential. So we were sitting together at the Business's Mission Conference in Philadelphia, I believe in 2018. David, do you remember?
I do.
We were outside, and actually a couple of our Kenyan alumni were in attendance. And I remember it was early in the feeling out what might this look like. And this alum's business was booming at the time. And I remember David asking him, what are you going to do if this business really takes off and you end up with significant wealth to steward? Because you need to guard your heart, and you need to think about what that would look like for your family and what that would mean for the kingdom. And I just sat there taking note of that. I don't believe in most cases an impact investor is going to ask that question to someone in that setting. And so as we've looked at this, there's lots of different things that we're exploring. Longer term for Synapse, we do see participation in creating deal flow and some other opportunities with the investment side of things as a potential source of ongoing revenue and sustainability for us. But in the journey that we're in together, I go back to that story just to say we're knit together at the heart, and we want the same things.
Good. Excellent. I think there's a question. I know Dave can weigh in on this as well. Each of you can. Just a quick question on do either or both of the organizations have a relationship or interaction with Bridge to Rwanda?
And I told Toby here, I said, well, I was going back and forth with Dale Dawson on email earlier today. So the simple answer is yes, he's a dear friend, and I've been involved for longer than we have time to tell about the way the Lord's used he and I together to impact lots of lives in Africa. But more importantly, maybe we could each answer a question about how are we seeing referrals and networks come into play, whether it's Dale and Bridge to Rwanda or others that are benefiting both of our ministries by people that are here on the phone that will know others in East Africa and elsewhere. So Matthew?
Yeah,
Bridge to Rwanda or broadly? Yeah.
To Bridge to Rwanda, I'll speak briefly. Yeah, Dale's a friend, fantastic. We shared time together at an investment conference a couple of years ago. There's not a formal relationship in Rwanda, but we are working there, and we're discussing some of these same ideas. I think stepping back a little bit more broadly, and that summary point I was making in the chart about the stages of entrepreneurial growth and the opportunity to see a scalable impact with these specifically entrepreneurs trying to grow and scale companies. Partnership is one of the most important things for Synapse. So in local environments, that has functionally looked like close partnerships with the local church, with other entrepreneur support organizations, with investors. There's a huge interest, I think, for everyone to say, when we have this shared goal of supporting the catalysts that can create economic growth, can create and sustain jobs. And then when we get specifically on this level of a heart for the kingdom of God, there's so much that can be done. So there's been a lot of great work with Faith-Driven Entrepreneur and Faith-Driven Investor and other networks. And I could go on a long time. Our friends, Mango Fund, I think George is on the call, and connections that we have in Uganda is a really relevant example. So it's an essential part for us of our operational model. And I think even more when we look at multi-generational God-sized dent in the problem, we have to do it together.
John, a bunch of questions that maybe you just answer pretty quickly here, but some questions about, do we use debt and equity? Is there a way that we could use a guarantee fund to leverage capital even more effectively? Just broader thoughts on that in short form.
Yeah, great question. So Talanton is primarily a debt fund, but we also selectively do very small but important equity positions as part of an overall investment package. And we sometimes do venture debt, which is quite attractive to many businesses, because what that means is we'll do typically a lower interest rate over 5 years, and then we'll have a royalty on sales. So the business ends up repaying Talanton as they grow at a greater amount. So it's a lower risk to the business up front. I like to call what we do responsible capital. We really want to come in and assess the business. What is it capable of generating in terms of cash flow, and what can they responsibly borrow and put to work effectively over a 5-year investment horizon. So we carefully chose 8% as a return target for the fund, net of all fees and costs, so that we can make very competitive loans relative to what's available on local markets. So with loan guarantees, it's not our strategy to be a sole guarantee operator, but we're actually exploring some loan guarantees to benefit our risk profile with several organizations that do loan guarantees as part of managing our portfolio for our investors. So I guess I'll leave it at that, David, unless you feel free to chime in, David, if you want to add to that.
I'd add one thing quickly. We're working with some folks that believe that if we could find a significant guarantee, that we could actually democratize the impact investing space significantly by opening it up to mutual fund investors. I'm not going to go there today. It's a deep conversation, but some kind of loan guarantee into a structure could significantly expand the capital to expand the mission. So it's one of the things we're praying about how to do it, and are welcoming of ideas and suggestions from anybody on this call on ways to do that.
Very good. Matthew, this is for you. A couple of questions specific to Synapse and the funding side. First, how are donated dollars used at Synapse? Staff, fixed costs, scholarships, et cetera. So that's the first question. And then the second question is more specific of what is our fundraising target for 2021, and what are we looking for to support all these ventures, and how much of that is dedicated to Kenya versus other hubs?
Yeah, good questions. So in terms of how funds are used, if you step back and think again about what we do as an entrepreneur support organization or a capacity builder, are phrases that are used. We are training entrepreneurs, we're accelerating entrepreneurs, we have advisory and coaching, and then this ongoing community invitation that we make to everyone. So the majority of our costs are human resources. We don't have much in the way of brick and mortar at all. We have an office in Nairobi, we have an office in Kampala, and then we're dispersed with a handful of staff here in the United States. So in terms of the efficiency of what we do, our percent of programs over the last several years has been right around 80%. So funds are used to staff our teams. They are used, I mentioned the delta earlier between the program income that we generate and what we charge entrepreneurs. So Each one of those program initiatives has a fee. We think it's really important that entrepreneurs have skin in the game, that they view this as, I'm paying for service, I'm paying for support. We actually like when they're tough on us. But there's still a gap between what we are able to charge and what would lead to real sustainability. So a significant portion of that percent to programs goes to fund those staff and fund those gaps. We are doing some things with scholarships directly, scholarshiping certain programs. We're continuing to evaluate that. One of our kind of analyzing strategy discussions is historically, our dynamic with entrepreneurs has always been, they are not in any way viewing us as a provider of aid. They're paying for service, they're getting that equipping, they're growing a profitable company. In fact, before COVID, I had never been asked by an entrepreneur for money personally or at the organizational level. That has happened twice in the last year by personal friends of mine who said, Matthew, I can't meet payroll. Would you be willing to consider that as an individual? And so that speaks to their mindset, which I'm taking time on this because it's critical that they see this as, I'm not coming for some sort of subsidized ongoing relationship. I'm coming to be equipped, and my option is to make this business work. In terms of overall fundraising budget, I'll be brief. It's $1.775 million for the global organization for 2021. And I think, Toby, there was one more question that I think I missed. The breakdown between countries?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, how much is Kenya versus other hubs?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember that right off the top of my head. The majority of the East Africa allocation is to Kenya. Kenya was started in 2010. It's by far our most mature program. Uganda was started in 2018. Rwanda came on a year later. So they're following a similar trajectory. And then I mentioned very, very briefly, we do have staff allocated to support partner organizations in 6 other countries around the world. So if that was interesting, I could follow up with someone on the exact East Africa breakdown, but the majority goes to Kenya right now.
Another good question for both of you. It's a risk category. What are some of the challenges that keep you up at night? Corruption was mentioned earlier, but what other areas of concern are top of mind right now?
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll chime in. Matthew, please follow.
I only ask the questions, John. You get to have the answers.
Yeah, there's plenty of things that could keep you up at night if you let them. That's the bottom line. Certainly, when you invest in mid-size, scalable businesses in East Africa, you look at politics, you look at the impact of the pandemic. You look at kind of the cultural things we've discussed, endemic corruption, and you have to kind of stay very close to these investments. So one of Talanton's goals is not just to get involved in financing and then be passive. We actually look at each investment and say, what are the support they need? How can we come alongside them as horizontal partners, a seat at the table? Sometimes that's on a board, helping them develop good governance. Sometimes it's just checking in weekly. We do a lot of that. It's listening to issues, helping them sort through problems, ethical issues, personal struggles. It's about that deep relationship where you mitigate risk, but more importantly, you generate ministry opportunities. And I'll have to say this, the feeling is both ways. I benefit so much from hearing their stories, from sharing my own stories, from deep relationship. It's a two-way street. And it's really about the entrepreneurs and their stories and their leadership opportunities that gives you good, restful sleep. When you talk to them and they inspire you with, here's what I'm doing, here's where we're going. Talanton is really fortunate that all 7 of our investments to date are on track. The one that's been struggling mainly, the educational model in Kenya, we believe is a very, very viable business that's going to go in the right direction as soon as the pandemic lifts. So we're excited about where things are at. I'm sleeping well, thankfully. So, but it's not without challenges. Matthew?
Mine's an extension of what John shared. When we step back and think about 1,295 alumni of programs. He mentioned earlier that these things can be really abstract. They're theories, they're concepts, they're statistics. And I'm so proud of our team. Some of them are on this call that they press so far beyond that. And these are people, and we know many of them. So when we look at COVID and what now Kenya is dealing with, a third wave, and the restrictions that that's bringing to the economy and to education, and especially sectors, tourism, events, and others that are just being hit so hard, where good businesses have been built. So you think about the entrepreneurs, and many of them are friends of ours, and what they're trying to walk through. And we have statistics on this. 76% of those who graduate from programs are still in business 3 years after they complete it. And that's an encouragement, but it doesn't alleviate the concern of what's happening in that entrepreneur's family. And then, and it goes back to the model, but it's personal. You think about, what about their employees? What about those dependents? What about the ripple effects of those jobs? And what happens when those go away? It's not abstract. It's people trying to figure out, how do I live? How do I make it? How do I be strong for my family? And so you couple that with church partners and others that are dealing with those things. We never want to try to pretend we're the Messiah. We're not. But those things do weigh, and we're doing our best to be responsive and help to meet those needs.
Great. Maybe Matthew, we'll refer to one of your charts and ask a question to both of you. Your 2-line chart that showed the number of thousands of small businesses, and then John, the small number that Talanton gets to pick. So the question is, how do you sift through all of the opportunities and actually figure out, in Talanton's case, which ones, John, do we choose to invest in? And Matthew, you still only have small numbers of people that can be in the accelerator education programs. How do you choose who's in, who isn't? So question for both of you.
How about I'll go first, John. I'll just quickly talk about, I know we only have a little bit of time. So for us, the program progression is one way that we see over time who are really high potential people. What steps do they take? Do they pivot when they encounter hard times? Are they tenacious? Are they having success? Do they have traction in the market? When we get to the accelerator, there's a very formal process for what that looks like, and looking at the quality of the entrepreneur, the opportunity with the company that they're growing. And there's a whole set of things. And when we initiate that, we go on site. Those things, I think, are part of why we're able to refer companies like Rabboni to somebody like Talanton and say, we're not vouching for every aspect of the entire journey. We don't have perfect insight into those things, but there has been a journey that we've been walking. So John, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, we're almost at time, so I'll just answer real quick. You know, we've looked at over 70 businesses, and we've only invested in 7. So it begs the question, you know, what about those businesses we didn't invest in? One thing we've really tried hard as a team, and I want to emphasize, Talanton has 7 members of our team who have all been giving nearly round the clock attention to kind of building our pipeline and engaging with these CEOs and these entrepreneurs. And we really pray about our portfolio and our investment pipeline every month as a team. And it's probably one of the most careful considerations we have is how far along do we take them through due diligence, and at each juncture giving them honest feedback and saying no, not yet, with grace, and building up their dignity in the process to say, listen, you're not quite a fit for Talanton, and here's 3 reasons why. And if you get there on these 3 areas, it will help you in many circumstances get there. Then we can engage a deeper due diligence and move towards exploring an investment. And we've done that a number of times. So every business we engage with is an opportunity to start to live out our faith, to start to give really good support and feedback. But we're quite careful to take those that we feel like are really good for our investors and for the fund, and ultimately for scalable impact. Those are the ones we go deep into due diligence with and take to our investment committee to approve for an investment.
Super.
Very good. Well, we did have a couple of other questions. We're going to respond to those directly since we're at the top of the hour.
Well, I just want to say thanks. We opened this by talking about stories. It's so good that you joined us today, and we want you to join the story of the Talanton Synapse partnership, the story of impact. You can help us write the narrative of the next 3, 4, 5 years. We'd love that. And we welcome your conversation. So if your question didn't get answered, please know that we have a running list of those questions. We'll get back to you. And again, let's set up a meeting and start a dialogue. And we want to make sure we're answering your questions, but more importantly, building a relationship. So thanks again. Really appreciate getting to know all of you today and for listening.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for many of you for years of encouragement, partnership, support, prayers. We can't do it without you. We're excited to continue the conversation. So thank you so much.
God bless.
Bye now.